With me this week is my friend and colleague, Aiden Buzzetti. He runs the nonprofit that I sit on the board of, the 1776 Foundation. Aiden, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me on, Ron.
Of course. So, Aiden, let's start with the Department of Education. It's ending or it's closing its doors. Trump can't end it by executive order, but he's dismantling it. What do you think the biggest impact, if any, will have on local school districts?
I think the majority of the impact on school districts in particular will be fairly limited to the grants with a lot of these DEI initiatives attached to them in the first place. A lot of the
Hmm.
department's activity is focused on loans and state and local funding accounts for the vast majority, over 80% of funding for school districts. So I think as they start winding down certain programs in the department, that we'll see less of an incentive for school districts to pursue equity policies and restorative justice policies that were tied to federal grants. But that's about it.
Can you, and if you don't know any top of your head, then that's fine. But do you know of any equity policies that the government spends on,
Well,
the
under
federal
the
government?
prior administration, they listed equity as one of the broader requirements for all federal grants coming out of the department. And then some of them had more specific initiatives. I wouldn't be able to name all of them, but it is not uncommon for the federal fundings to have grants focused on equity or reviewing disciplinary practices with a focus on restorative justice and things like that. But those are mostly holdovers from the Biden
That's what happened
administration.
under Obama.
Right. And a lot of it did begin under the Obama administration and then continued with the Biden administration.
Well, specifically with the restorative justice, there was this old liberal notion that there was a pipeline, prison to school pipeline that basically, you know, like the liberal rhetoric was like a black kid got detention once and now he's spending life in jail for smoking marijuana. Like this was like the overall all ridiculous narrative they were putting out. It wasn't exactly true, but the restorative justice thing that you're talking about was they were saying if a student is Hispanic or black, because there's a higher percentage of them to their overall population in prison, be more lenient on them. And this is like the famous case now is was it Sandy Hook shooting, right? No, it wasn't Sandy Hook. It was the one in Florida, the Stone Douglas
Yes.
Memorial, whatever it was. That was in the Broward County shooting. That was the case where the student had multiple infractors, including bringing dead pets to school, talking about abusing animals, talking about, attacking other kids. And he had no disciplinary record. So when he went to go buy a gun, there was nothing for cops to sit there and flag and say, oh, this kid could be a problem, because it was all brushed under the rug. So that way, if he went on to be arrested for something lighter later on, there would be no record of that he had a history of problematic behavior or anything.
And that philosophy, unfortunately, happens across hundreds, hopefully not thousands, but potentially thousands of school districts where they intentionally decide not to punish students, oftentimes due to their ethnicity, because they're worried about some kind of disparate impact or suspensions leading to a lifetime of them in prison for whatever particular reason. And that's one of the problems that school districts are dealing with now, just these massive disciplinary issues with their students. It's something that we found everybody cares about, whether they're a parent or a teacher or a student. The disciplinary situation in a lot of schools across the U.S. is horrible right now.
We before Aiden ran the 1776 Foundation, he worked for me at the 1776 Project PAC, and Aiden was in charge of like meeting all the people who wanted to run for office. So he has talked to thousands of people about local education, which is he was a godsend for me for taking that on for me. But what what would shock us often is how many red states and red districts had this problem. There was one in Florida, super Republican county. Now I'm thinking of it. Was it Red River or something like that?
Indian
Red
River.
Fork County. I forget. Indian River, Florida. Yes, Aiden is also got the only part of brain that's working because mine doesn't anymore. Indian River, Florida. They had this. They had a disparate impact on students based on the race. Wasn't that the case, right,
Yeah,
Aiden?
it was racially based. They
Yeah.
wanted
So if you were,
they wanted
go
to do
ahead.
a 1-to-1 ratio on disciplinary infractions based on the race of the student. So, and I think that that district had a higher proportion of minority students. So functionally, it would mean that they would punish the non minority students more, or the minority populations less overall.
It's in Asians specifically more than blacks and Hispanics. It was crazy, but it happens in red districts too. I said before, you talk to thousands of people who running for school board who care about local education. What's, in your opinion, the biggest misunderstanding in terms of rhetoric coming from talking heads, both liberal and conservative, to what actually frustrates teachers and principals and parents at school boards?
Yeah, I think on the conservative side, especially because of what a lot of parents saw during the pandemic, they have a large scale mistrust or distrust in teachers and administrators. And what we found is that, especially in states like Louisiana, who I think was the only state really that defied the general decline in education in the United States, they actually gave more flexibility to teachers in the classroom. So they overhauled their curriculum, but they also allowed the teachers to be a little bit more flexible in how they taught that curriculum, in addition to providing other services. But a lot of teachers rebel on very strict rules, which is fine. And a lot of parents don't understand that. But I also think that in general, people don't understand just how much the school board and the individual members and the administrators run the day to day operations and set those policies. Just because, for example, President Trump is doing all of this action and sending out all these executive orders regarding the Department of Education does not mean that the issue has gone away. It has always been a local problem, and people need to understand that it's going to take local solutions to root out a lot of these divisive issues.
Right, and I think that that's you mentioned it before. You mentioned it in your answer. Administrators and the frustration around administrators is what I would always hear the most often about. People who are unelected, um, hired by superintendents to sit there and make broad decision that really impacts teachers' ability to teach in the classroom. Um, and that would seem overwhelmingly frustrating that no one really ever talked about. People think it's always like the teachers being like the super progressive ones, when in fact it's, I would say, 9 times out of 10 administrators making teachers do things they don't really want to do.
Yeah,
I
and
don't know if you had that experience.
that's why having school board members who know how to oversee the superintendent and the administrators is so important, because the superintendent is basically the CEO of a school district. They're doing most of the day to day work. School board members, in their current form, do oversight. They're basically the board of directors, right? So they can set the policies and make sure the school district is going in the right direction. But the superintendent has a lot of flexibility, and if you have the wrong person, then they can lead to a lot of damage, trickling all the way through the system.
I like the way you put that. Yeah, in school districts, school boards, you hire the superintendents or renew their contracts. What is, from talking to parents, what is the biggest concerns in local education today?
I think that number one, the biggest concern that we've seen is concern over school safety, not just from outside threats, but inside threats as well. But also generally, students can't read, and I think more parents are waking up to the fact that their children can't read, and that's concerning. I mean, we have to be able to read. We're a very
I would say
information
so.
heavy society, and talking earlier about the school to prison pipeline. If your kids can't read, they're more likely to commit crime and end up in jail. So I think there's a broader awareness now with parents that, one, schools aren't as safe as they used to be or should be, and two, that schools by and large are starting to fail. We have had
Yeah,
several
we're
decades of
and
poor performance.
And we're not even in a situation where the kids are too big to get inside the school. Like, what is this, a school for ants? How can the children learn to read if they can't fit inside the building? That's from Zoolander, if anyone's under the age of 25 and has never seen the movie. Anyway, yeah, I completely agree with that. Um, but what are the obstacles to innovation for most? Let's say you have a great person who wants to run for school board, they get elected. What are the biggest obstacles and the hurdles that we always see and that you're hearing now from running the foundation that school board members, well-intentioned ones who want to do the right thing, are dealing with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think I would say from a structural standpoint, the education community has dealt with a lot of fads over the last couple decades, fads that haven't necessarily
Talk about some of
worked.
these fads.
I mean, well,
Yeah.
we used to teach,
Sight learning.
yeah, we used to teach teachers, 3 cueing, where they would point out, uh, the word on the page and connect it with a picture. And we know that doesn't work. It was the subject of a lot of debate several decades ago, but a lot of teachers still use it. So there are parts of the education system and teachers' colleges that are still using outdated methods
Right.
because those stuck around so long and were so damaging. There's also some resistance in the community, or the communities that are focused on education reform, to looking at new opportunities as
Yeah.
well. So that's a little bit of a
Wait, so
double edged sword.
what Aiden wait. So what Aiden is talking about right now is in the 2000s, I used to have something called phonics in a lot of classrooms back in like the 80s and 90s. And then in the 2000s, Bush was all about phonics. And because Bush was evil, to a lot of liberals embraced something called sight learning, which is what Aiden mentioned. And that's basically where kids would memorize the word and that's how they would apply it, but they wouldn't actually learn the building blocks of sentence structure and word structure. It was a terrible form. We put it in all the teachers' colleges. We've adopted it in most of our states. It set kids back tremendously in reading. And teachers' colleges, as Aiden said, still do it. Teachers' colleges are the root of so many educational issues. Teachers' colleges and teachers' unions, because the teachers' colleges are the woke progressive places, and the unions are what, in my opinion, thwart a lot of innovation because unions represent their workers, they don't represent their students.
That's true. And Florida's
Does
done
that make
something
sense?
interesting, and that they've started to, I think they passed a bill that required teachers unions to recertify. So it gives the individual teachers in the district a little bit more power on whether or not they want to affiliate with the union. And then if they don't hit a certain threshold, then the union has to dissolve. So that's one way that Florida in particular has been pushing back on the
Right.
teachers unions, which has been really interesting to see. But yeah, the teachers unions, they defend their interests, which is really the union administrators, not necessarily the teachers, which I think has been problems with, or the problem with, a lot of these public sector unions in the first place. They haven't really pushed for substantive reform. They want to make sure that teachers are protected in their jobs. So when conservatives try to fix the system by introducing a little bit more personal accountability for teachers, they start screaming and fight really hard against it.
If you were advising a school board, let's say all 5 members were, or 7 members, whatever the number is, were elected, and came to you and said, "Hey, we want you to help us change." What are 3 things a local government could do, a local school board could do to make their education policies better? And I know everything's personalized and different, but an overall thing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing that we're actually starting to see now is, I would tell them to do a comprehensive overview on what exactly is in their curriculum, and how much are they paying people to pull it together. A lot of these school boards have massive budgets, sometimes in billions and billions of dollars. So making sure that they know where the money is going, and what exactly they're paying for, is very important when you're looking at the progress of the school district. I would also inform them to set up a way to track progress with the superintendent and introduce a little bit more administrative accountability. Like I said before, the superintendent really is the CEO, and the board is just there to make sure that everything stays on track. But I think that they can really introduce a culture of accountability and progress that a lot of school districts don't have. And the third thing is I would make sure that the school board actually engages parents on a regular basis. That's not necessarily strictly a policy change, but having parental input in the school board is extremely important, especially now because so many people don't trust public schools. And if you're able to engage parents and see how certain policies affect the day to day lives of those families and their kids, then you'll be able to get a really good handle on what exactly is and isn't working in the district.
So what does the 1776 Foundation do? What is your goal from the non?
Yeah, so our goal on the nonprofit is to really form a foundation for turning school districts around in a positive way. We have, when I was working with the 1776 Project PAC, and I was talking with parents and school board candidates from coast to coast across the country, we found that basically everybody is dealing with the same problems. It differs, of course, from state to state, depending on the laws there. But broadly speaking, everyone is dealing with the same issues. And so our goal is to get school board members from across the country connected. We want to get them mentorship and start providing them resources to actually turn their school districts around and take that successful model and make sure other people can adopt it as well.
Well, Aiden, that's great. Where can people go to read more about you, what your stuff and the foundation?
Yeah, so I would visit the foundation's website, foundation1776.org, and you can follow me on Twitter at Aiden, Aiden Buzzetti, Buzzetti.
The great Aiden Buzzetti, one of my favorite people I've ever worked with. Aiden, thank you for being on this week's podcast.